Hollywood's golden age wasn't just about carefully choreographed romance and pristine movie magic. Behind the velvet curtains and studio gates, there existed a world where the boundaries between performance and reality often blurred in ways that would shock modern audiences. While moviegoers sat in darkened theaters, watching their favorite stars share passionate embraces and dramatic confrontations, few understood that what they were witnessing sometimes went far beyond mere acting technique. The studio system of the 1930s through 1950s created an environment where directors wielded absolute power, where stars lived under ironclad contracts, and where the pursuit of authentic performances occasionally crossed lines that make us uncomfortable today. What I'm about to share with you isn't found in the glossy studio biographies or the sanitized official histories. These are the stories that industry insiders whispered about, that crew members witnessed firsthand, and that eventually leaked out through memoirs, biographies, and tell-all books written decades later, when the participants were safely dead or retired. Let me be clear, this isn't about celebrating these practices. It's about understanding how different Hollywood once was, and how the quest for realism on screen sometimes came at a very real human cost. These 8 stars pushed boundaries, broke rules, and left behind complicated legacies that force us to reconsider what we thought we knew about cinema's most glamorous era. Tyrone Power. Tyrone Power possessed the kind of matinee idol looks that seem almost computer-generated in their perfection. With his dark hair, chiseled features, and smoldering eyes, he became one of 20th Century Fox's biggest stars throughout the 1930s and 1940s. Women swooned over him. Studios built entire films around his romantic appeal, but the man behind that perfect facade lived a far more complicated reality than his public image suggested. During the filming of The Razor's Edge in 1946, Power was determined to bring something rawer and more honest to his performance. Based on W. Somerset Maugham's novel, the film required him to portray a man searching for meaning after the trauma of World War I. His co-star Jean Tierney, herself struggling with personal demons and mental health challenges that would later require hospitalization, found in Power a scene partner who pushed for an emotional intensity that went beyond the typical Hollywood approach. Director Edmund Goulding, known for his ability to elicit powerful performances from his actors, recognized something special happening between Power and Tierney. According to reports from the set, Goulding would frequently let the cameras continue rolling even after calling cut, capturing moments of raw, unguarded emotion that existed in the spaces between the scripted scenes. This technique, while producing compelling footage, also blurred the lines between performance and genuine emotional vulnerability. Power's personal life was far more complex than studio publicity departments ever acknowledged. In an era when a star's career could be destroyed by even a whisper of scandal, Power navigated his life with careful calculation. He maintained a public image of heterosexual romance while privately exploring aspects of his identity that had to remain hidden. His marriages served, at least in part, as cover, a common practice for many gay and bisexual actors of the era who understood that the alternative was professional ruin. During Blood and Sand in 1941, his pairing with Rita Hayworth created such palpable on-screen chemistry that the production code censors examined every frame with unusual scrutiny. The scene where Power and Hayworth share a passionate kiss, their faces illuminated by dramatically shifting shadows, had to be carefully edited because the intensity registered as too explicitly sexual for the standards of the time. The censors didn't have specific violations to point to. It was simply that the desire felt too real, too unfiltered. Linda Darnell, who appeared alongside Power in several films including Brigham Young and The Mark of Zorro, later reflected on his unique presence. "Ty had this way of looking at you," she recalled in interviews years later, "that made everything else disappear. The crew, the cameras, the lights, suddenly it was just you and him, and that intensity was both thrilling and frightening." The rumors about Power's relationship with director Henry King during Captain from Castile circulated throughout Hollywood, though nothing was ever publicly confirmed. King directed Power in 7 films over the course of their careers, and their working relationship was marked by unusual closeness and trust. Power's death came suddenly and symbolically. While filming a dueling scene for Solomon and Sheba in Spain in 1958, the 44-year-old actor suffered a massive heart attack. He died shortly after, leaving his final performance unfinished, a fitting metaphor perhaps, for a life spent maintaining a public persona that never quite matched his private reality. The footage that exists shows a still handsome man, though the strain of maintaining his double life for decades is visible in ways it hadn't been in his youth. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner arrived in Hollywood with no formal acting training, discovered when her brother-in-law sent photographs of the North Carolina tobacco farmer's daughter to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. What she lacked in technique, she more than compensated for with a natural, almost feral screen presence that couldn't be taught. Her breakthrough came with The Killers in 1946, based on the Ernest Hemingway short story. Playing opposite Burt Lancaster in his film debut, Gardner commanded the screen with an ease that belied her inexperience. Lancaster, a trained acrobat and experienced stage actor, later admitted that he found himself forgetting his lines because he was genuinely distracted by Gardner's magnetic presence. Director Robert Siodmak quickly recognized that Gardner worked best when allowed to follow her instincts, rather than being forced into rigid technical performances. Gardner's marriage to Frank Sinatra, which lasted from 1951 to 1957, was by all accounts a passionate and volatile relationship. Both had fierce tempers, both drank heavily, and both were used to being the center of attention. When Gardner went to Africa to film Mogambo in 1953, still married to Sinatra, the singer's jealousy became legendary. He would fly to Africa, convinced that something was happening between Gardner and her co-star Clark Gable. And perhaps he was right to worry. Mogambo, directed by John Ford and filmed on location in Kenya and Uganda, reunited Gardner with Gable, with whom she'd previously worked. The chemistry between them was undeniable. Grace Kelly, the third star of the film and making only her second movie, later recalled being somewhat awed by Gardner's complete lack of self-consciousness in front of the camera. The famous scene where Gable and Gardner embrace in the rain allegedly went on for much longer than what appears in the final cut. Ford, not a director known for indulging actors, reportedly let the camera roll because what he was capturing felt too authentic to interrupt. Crew members on the difficult African location shoot noticed that Gardner and Gable would often disappear during breaks, returning with a particular energy that was hard to ignore. Gardner never pretended to be anything other than what she was. She drank, she cursed, she had affairs, and she refused to apologize for any of it. After her marriage to Sinatra ended, she eventually settled in Spain, where she lived for many years, and where her reputation for living life on her own terms became the stuff of legend. In The Barefoot Contessa, 1954, Gardner played Maria Vargas, a Spanish dancer discovered by a Hollywood director and turned into a star. The parallels to her own life were obvious, and Gardner's performance carried a knowing quality. She understood this character from the inside. Humphrey Bogart, her co-star, observed that Gardner was perhaps the only actress he'd ever worked with who truly lived with the same intensity as the characters she portrayed. The dance scenes in The Barefoot Contessa, particularly the sequence where she performs on the beach, carried a primal sensuality that Gardner didn't have to manufacture. It simply existed as part of who she was. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz, known for being cerebral and literary in his approach, found himself shooting Gardner differently than he shot other actresses, more spontaneously, more instinctively, trusting that her natural magnetism would translate on film. Gardner's later years were marked by financial struggles, health problems exacerbated by decades of smoking and drinking, and a fading career. She died in London in 1990, at age 67, having lived exactly the way she wanted despite the personal cost. Her filmography stands as testament to a performer who brought genuine passion to the screen, even when, or perhaps especially when, that passion came from her own turbulent life. William Holden. The darkness behind the all-American face. William Holden looked like the perfect American man, handsome in a rugged way, athletic, masculine without being threatening. But beneath that carefully constructed image was someone far more damaged and complex, and that darkness infused many of his greatest performances. Sunset Boulevard, 1950, gave Holden one of his most iconic roles. Joe Gillis, the down-on-his-luck screenwriter, who becomes entangled with faded silent film star Norma Desmond. Gloria Swanson, who played Desmond, later spoke about how unsettling it was to work with Holden, because the boundaries between his performance and his reality seemed to dissolve. "You never quite knew," she said, "when Bill was acting, and when he was just being." The scenes depicting Gillis's uncomfortable relationship with Norma, trading companionship and implied intimacy for financial security, carried a brutal honesty that suggested Holden understood this dynamic from personal experience. Director Billy Wilder created a masterpiece that worked partly because his lead actor brought genuine torment to the role. By the time Holden made Picnic in 1955, his alcoholism was becoming harder to hide. Yet in some ways the disease enhanced his performance. The film's centerpiece, the dance scene where Holden's character, Hall and Kim Novak's Madge moved together to Moonglow, became one of the most erotically charged sequences of 1950s American cinema, without showing anything the censors could object to. Director Joshua Logan shot the scene in long unbroken takes, recognizing that what was happening between his actors had a spontaneous chemistry that couldn't be replicated. Novak later admitted that Holden intimidated her. His intensity, combined with the alcohol he was consuming to manage his anxiety, created an unpredictable energy that made her genuinely nervous, and that nervousness is visible on screen, adding to the scene's power. Holden's relationship with Audrey Hepburn during the filming of Sabrina, 1954, was one of Hollywood's sadder love stories. Holden, already married, fell deeply in love with the much younger Hepburn. She reciprocated his feelings, until she learned that he'd had a vasectomy, and couldn't father children, something that was a deal-breaker for Hepburn, who very much wanted a family. The pain of that rejection is palpable in their scenes together, particularly in the moments when Holden's character must step aside and let Sabrina go to another man. It's acting informed by genuine heartbreak, and the result is far more powerful than if Holden had been merely pretending. Holden's death in 1981 was as tragic as anything in his films. He fell while drunk in his apartment in Santa Monica, hit his head, and bled to death over the course of several days. His body wasn't discovered for nearly a week. It was a lonely, awful end for a man who had been one of Hollywood's biggest stars, who'd won an Oscar for Stalag 17, and who'd given so much of himself to his performances that there wasn't much left over for actually living. Bette Davis, the force of nature. Bette Davis didn't seduce audiences with conventional beauty or feminine charm. She conquered them with raw talent, fierce intelligence, and a willingness to be ugly, mean, and unsympathetic on screen. In doing so, she changed what was possible for actresses in Hollywood. Her breakthrough came with Of Human Bondage, 1934, where she played Mildred Rogers, a cruel, manipulative waitress who destroys the man obsessed with her. Davis's portrayal was so visceral and unflinching that it shocked audiences. She made herself physically unattractive, whined her dialogue, and brought a viciousness to the role that was genuinely disturbing to watch. Leslie Howard, her co-star, found working with Davis exhausting. She brought such intensity to every take that he would frequently ask for breaks. The famous scene where Mildred verbally destroys Philip, telling him "You're a cripple, a cripple, a cripple," was largely improvised by Davis, who channeled her rage against a studio system that constantly tried to control and diminish her. Jack Warner and the Warner Brothers executives didn't know what to do with an actress who refused to be just another pretty face. Davis fought constantly for better roles, for more money, for creative control. She sued Warner Brothers in 1936 to break her contract. She lost, but the publicity made her even more valuable to the studio, and she emerged with better terms. Jezebel, 1938, was Warner's answer to Gone with the Wind. Davis had desperately wanted to play Scarlett O'Hara, but David O. Selznick cast Vivien Leigh instead. So Warner Brothers rushed Jezebel into production, giving Davis a Southern Belle role that allowed her to show her range. She won her second Oscar for playing Julie Marsden, a manipulative woman whose pride destroys her chance at happiness. Her scenes with Henry Fonda carried a disturbing tension. Davis didn't seduce with traditional feminine wiles. She seduced with power, intelligence, and an implied threat. Fonda later said that working with Bette was like dancing with a wild animal. You were thrilled, but you also knew she might turn on you at any second. All About Eve, 1950 gave Davis, at age 42, one of the richest roles of her career. Her portrayal of Margot Channing, an aging Broadway star facing obsolescence, was multi-layered and heartbreaking. The scenes with Gary Merrill, who played her director and lover, carried particular authenticity because Davis and Merrill were falling in love during filming. They married soon after and had a tumultuous relationship marked by mutual alcoholism and, according to some accounts, physical violence. The marriage lasted 10 years and produced 2 adopted children, but it was never happy. Yet on screen in All About Eve, they captured something extraordinary: the complicated reality of 2 talented, difficult people trying to love each other while fighting their own demons. Davis worked almost until her death at 81 in 1989. Acting wasn't an escape for her. It was the only thing she knew how to do, the only place where her intensity and refusal to compromise were assets rather than liabilities. Her legacy is complicated. She revolutionized what actresses could achieve, but she also left behind a trail of difficult relationships and traumatized colleagues who never forgot what it was like to work with someone who recognized absolutely no boundaries between life and performance. Robert Mitchum. The Sleeping Lion. Robert Mitchum perfected the art of appearing half asleep while radiating danger. With his heavy-lidded eyes, laconic delivery, and seemingly casual approach to acting, he created some of film noir's most memorable characters, men who were dangerous, precisely because they didn't seem to care about anything. His arrest for marijuana possession, in 1948, should have ended his career. Instead, it somehow enhanced his reputation as Hollywood's bad boy. RKO Radio Pictures, his studio, briefly suspended him, but quickly realized that audiences found his real-life troubles made him even more compelling on screen. He served 60 days in jail and returned to work more popular than ever. Out of the Past, 1947, paired Mitchum with Jane Greer in one of film noir's most toxically seductive relationships. Greer later said that Mitchum never seemed to be acting. He simply inhabited the character with such complete naturalness that it was almost eerie. Bob didn't seem to prepare, she recalled. He just was, and that was more frightening than any amount of method acting. On set, Mitchum was known for his professionalism. He knew his lines, hit his marks, and didn't cause production delays. But he was also famous for living without filters. He drank heavily, smoked constantly, and pursued affairs with co-stars and crew members alike. He treated acting as a job, rather than a calling, which paradoxically made his performances feel more authentic than those of actors who took it all much more seriously. The Night of the Hunter, 1955, showcased Mitchum at his most terrifying. Playing a murderous preacher, with love and hate tattooed on his knuckles, Mitchum genuinely frightened the child actors. Director Charles Laughton, in his only film as director, deliberately used the children's real fear to create authentic tension. This was years before method acting became de rigueur, but Mitchum understood instinctively that he could be more menacing by simply turning off his civilized side, rather than acting scary. His romantic scenes carried a predatory quality that made them unforgettable. In Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, 1957, the tension between his rough Marine and Deborah Kerr's nun stranded on a Pacific island during World War II crackled precisely because Mitchum didn't hide his character's desire. Kerr, known for playing elegant, refined women, found herself responding to that raw masculinity in ways that surprised her and elevated the film beyond its potentially cliched premise. During the filming of Ryan's Daughter, 1970 in Ireland. Mitchum had an affair with co-star Sarah Miles. That was an open secret on set. Miles was married to the film's screenwriter, Robert Bolt, who knew about the relationship but was powerless to stop it. Director David Lean, a perfectionist who frequently clashed with actors, found himself dependent on the chemistry between Mitchum and Miles, a chemistry that came directly from their off-screen involvement. Mitchum died in 1997, at age 79, having smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day for most of his life. He left behind over 100 films, and a reputation as the most laid-back man in Hollywood, a carefully constructed persona that hid someone far more intelligent, observant, and intense than he ever let on. These stories remind us to ask, when does dedication become self-destruction? When does authenticity cross into exploitation? There are no simple answers, but they must be faced.
That was today's story under the silent spotlight. If you enjoyed uncovering Hollywood's forgotten past, leave a like and subscribe for more vintage tragedies, mysteries, and untold legends. Until next time, keep the reel turning.